Excellent, lovely. So it's been a really inspiring day, and I just want to say, I have said to Chair of FWO, we've heard from the kind of current stars of the party, but I was delighted to just be in a session with Anneliese earlier with some of the stars of the future, Councillor Schieder, Councillor Lisa Colescott, Councillor Mariana Masters. If you're not already involved with Fabian Women's Network, get involved. That's where the stars of the future are. I have to say that right as Chair. So brilliant, here we are. This is going to be an excellent last session with an illustrious lineup of speakers. I'm going to use this mic. Hello. There we are. Is that better? Can you hear me at home? If you're at home, get a cup of tea. It's been a long day. Have a biscuit. We don't mind, do we, Anneliese? We're happy for that. And people here, we know that you've been well catered for throughout the day. And I have to say, it's the first time at a Fabian conference there's still been coffee left. So I'm into this hybrid format because I got a coffee at 3 o'clock this afternoon. And obviously that's what counts. Anyway, how the left wins. Without further ado, we're going to be hearing from Anneliese Dodds, Andreas Schieder, an MEP, Paula Surridge, and Sarwar, MSP. So as I say, an excellent panel to end the day. Anneliese, I feel like you don't need an introduction, but you know, as we're here, Anneliese is a good friend of the Fabian, been a Fabian executive member, and she's obviously the MP for Oxford East and has been since 2017, prior to which you were, of course, a member of the European Parliament. You're in the Shadow Treasury team. You were the first woman to hold the position of Shadow Chancellor of the Exchequer, and now you're smashing out the park as Shadow Minister for Women and Equalities, as well as being Chair of the Labour Party and doing the policy review. Just a few things. We're delighted to welcome you this afternoon. So please, can we give a round of applause to Anneliese before we go to her?
Well, thank you so much for that lovely introduction. It's fantastic to be here, and what an absolutely incredible room as well. It feels like I'm going to be beamed up, but really great to be at the end of such an exciting conference. Of course, it's a very, very proud Fabian. I was reflecting on the title of this last slot, and I think if we'd been here even just 2, 3, 4 years ago, this session wouldn't have been entitled How the Left Wins. Instead, it would have been entitled Why the Left Loses. We can remember that until recently, the left sadly was not winning. Of course, we weren't winning in the UK. We had our worst result in 2019 in 84 years. The PVDA and the Parti Socialiste had been well and truly PASOKified, and of course that term itself referring to the annihilation of social democracy in Greece. And in those countries where the left was in government back in the 2010s, countries like Italy, Portugal and Denmark, their control felt very fragile. For many of us, only New Zealand offered a clear but very rare ray of hope. And the 1990s, when only 2 out of 17 EU member states back then had not been social democratic, felt like a very, very long way away. But since then, of course, we have seen the centre left winning. We've been winning in Germany, in Norway, in Finland, in Sweden, in Denmark, and many major Italian and French cities, and in the Batley and Spen by-election here in the UK. And I was thinking back to Manwaring and Kennedy's book, which I'm sure a lot of people here have read, which was indeed entitled Why the Left Loses. And they suggested that back in the 2010s, institutions, ideology and leadership were increasingly stacked against the centre-left. Well, I think now those 3 factors actually are playing to our benefit, but only if we act with energy, self-discipline, determination, and above all, self-criticism. When it comes to institutions, many of those traditionally linked with support for left parties have, as we know, changed almost beyond recognition. We're in a new world of work and of new fault lines between nations and regions, often accompanied by a resurgent nationalism. But at least some of this change can be seized by the left rather than harming it. First, collective institutions are resurgent. Trade union membership in the UK at least has recently been on the rise after lows in the mid-2010s. And recent months have indicated in spades how individualism is no inoculator. Instead, Collective health services, local councils and neighbourhood groups have provided protection, whether that be through vaccination programmes or mutual aid. Parties on the right have proved themselves unable to harness the spirit of togetherness that's been so critical during this crisis. The spurious togetherness the right promotes, based on the stoking of division, has been comprehensively refuted, as people of all backgrounds have come together. Only the centre-left understands the positive power that's unleashed when we stand together, that we are stronger together. And there's no secret, that's the title of Labour's policy review. That brings me to ideas and ideology, where Manwaring and Kennedy again suggested that the left was tired and repetitive compared with policy innovation on the right. But I believe now the future of political ideas are the left's to seize or to squander. First, as work from our Scottish Future has shown, across the UK there's a shared rejection of the status quo. That's now stronger than it's ever been. And a shared desire for change, a majority support for a new Britain that's economically on the left, socially egalitarian and culturally respectful. And that finding cuts across those who support nationalism and those who reject it. And in my view, it frees the left from the supposition that we could only win by aping the right's determination to sow division and adopting a populist approach. Wrong in my view, in theory and in practice as well. Second, it's true that even with new German Chancellor Olaf Scholz's credible jobs-rich plan for the transition, the SPD did still lose votes to the Greens. But as the climate and ecological crises intensify, only left parties can offer solutions that promote jobs and livelihoods while protecting the environment. The political right's approach to industrial restructuring has always been destructive and job sapping. In contrast, the left can work with business and trade unions to demonstrate we respect people's concerns for job security and will work with them to deliver that security and the prosperity they deserve. And third, the understanding that no one is safe until everyone is safe puts the lie to right-wing rejections of multilateralism. But the centre-left's approach has evolved beyond what many would have viewed as a core assumption of the third way, that multinational forces can't be controlled, but only weathered. Hence Labour's plans to buy, make and sell more in Britain and to protect Britain's economic interests in international trade, whether they be steelworkers or farmers. Now, the final factor raised by Manwaring and Kennedy was the influence of leadership. Crises often provoke increased support for incumbent leaders, but only when those incumbents are perceived as sincere. Developments in the UK show how quickly that can change. Keir Starmer has often been compared to the new German Chancellor Olaf Scholz, for good reason. Both are authentic in their sincerity. When Keir says he'll treat the British people with respect, he's not telling, but he's summarising what he's shown consistently in following COVID rules. Indeed, he's self-isolated no less than 6 times. Just as no one could have imagined Scholz behaving like Armin Laschet when he laughed on a visit to a flood-hit region, no one could imagine Keir behaving as Boris Johnson has during this crisis. As Anya just said, integrity is a value that motivates our movement and not the political right. And of course, the same applies when it comes to Labour's leadership across the country, and us, Mark Drakeford and our Metro mayors, and it must apply to our candidates as we look towards the next general election. We'll need committed, sincere local leaders. And it's been that strong, sincere local connection that's enabled left representation in otherwise challenging national contexts like France and Italy. Labour's Future Candidates programme has a more diverse array of candidates than ever, all of them needing to be true champions for local people and places, with no better example of that having been shown than Kim Leadbeater in Batley and Spen. So while for much of the period since 2010, it's felt like our centre-left family has been swimming against the tide, To me, it does feel like that tide is turning. There's renewed appetite for solidarity and for personal integrity amongst those who lead. That gives us a tremendous opportunity. Let's now make sure that we seize it. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Anneliese. And I mean, I made a few notes, but committed and sincere leadership. I mean, what a contrast, Hyde, to what we've seen in the past week. So thank you so much for raising those points to kick us off. Brilliant, profound stuff. Now, I understand that Andreas Schieder is joining us. Excellent. Hang on, that looks like Sarwar. Oh, look, he's waving. Hi, Andreas. Can we have Andreas?
Hi, how are you?
Oh, welcome. Good. Thank you so much for joining us. We're just going to do a little intro and then I'll hand over to you. So for anyone who's unaware, Andreas is a member of the European Parliament, and he is the chair of the delegation to the EU North Macedonia Joint Parliamentary Committee and is part of the FEPS Next Left Research Programme. He was previously parliamentary leader of the Social Democratic Party in the National Council of Austria and the former state secretary in the Ministry of Finance in the government of Chancellor Werner Faymann from 2008 to 2013. And we're delighted to hear from his point of view about how the left wins. Thank you, Andreas. Welcome.
Welcome, everybody. And excuse this strange picture, but I had to connect via my mobile phone. So therefore, it is looking a little bit strange. Good afternoon, everybody, and thank you for the invitation to this delighted conference, which I was following also in the hours before, and I think it's coming to the right moment. Maybe to try to answer your question out of several perspectives. As you mentioned also, we are running in the FEPS, which is our European foundation, like you just have seen Anya and heard Anya Skripek before. Also the discussion, what could be the program, but also the impact of a Next Left, which is, I think, a very intensive process. But to answer your question, I think there are three major packages. The one is we have to be able. This means we need serious politicians. We need to be prepared, and also we must be able to not make the mistakes, but to be able to profit from the mistakes maybe of others. Probably I learned just recently that Boris Johnson anyway is giving a lot of opportunity to use his mistakes, which he's doing quite regularly. Secondly, I think there must be a will. The will means that the party and the political movement must be united, and there must be integrity, there must be a program, and there must be also the persons, because people are electing people. So this means also close to the people, as Bruno Kreisky once was saying, to make politics.
Come back, Andreas. That's how it works, isn't it?
Sorry,
oh, we lost you momentarily there, Andreas.
Yeah, because somebody called me. This is the shit when you have a phone conference. Somebody called in, but I brought away. I think probably I'm back again. So the third one is the most important. There is a need. There is a need for left and social democratic and social and labor politics. The equality in our societies, in incomes, in job opportunities, but also in educational opportunities is growing. The respect in our society is diminishing. There is more and more people who feeling the society is not paying the proper respect, that there is an elite which is doing what they want, and the other ones have just to swallow the problems. Like you could say, the ones having party in Downing Streets, while the other ones having COVID and serious social problems. And there is COVID, which was showing that social structures, public healthcare, and all these institutions are important. And of course, there is the big future issue, the climate change. And we all know a Green Deal needs a red heart. Otherwise, it will be again the normal people paying for the climate change. So therefore, this is also the programmatic need where there is a left approach. So if you have every ingredients in order, proper people and the proper program is fine. Just run with enjoyment the electoral campaign, and then probably it will work.
Thank you. That's excellent. Speedy pointers. We appreciate you joining us from your phone. Please stay online for the Q&A section later. Phone calls pending. Wonderful. Thank you. Just remind attendees in the room and online, you can be tweeting about this and following the debate online. Lots of rich contributions. So please do spread the word on your WhatsApp groups and via Twitter using the hashtag that you've been using all day, FEPS-Fab22. Brilliant. So we're now going to move on to Paula. Paula Surridge is a senior lecturer in political sociology at the University of Bristol, and she researches how social and political values influence political behaviour, amongst other topics. Now, but you've had a busy week, Paula. She's also the Deputy Director of UK in A Changing Europe, a charity that produces independent research into the UK's relationship with the European Union. I'm hoping... Good afternoon, Paula. Thank you for joining us, and a round of applause to welcome Paula.
Thank you. This is, I think, my first full hybrid event, so it's a slightly strange experience, but also quite nice to be able to have Saturday as normal and still contribute. So I'm going to focus on one particular part of the brief that we had, which was kind of what does the Labour Party need to do to win the next general election? And I think my first thought when I sat down with that question last night was hold it tomorrow. Perhaps if we could hold the general election tomorrow, that might help. More seriously, we've all read the research in the work, of the Labour Party review, the mountain to climb. We know that it was always going to be a very difficult task to come back from the 2019 election defeat. And I think the first point I want to make is that you don't have to get all the way to the summit of that mountain in order to have power at the end of the journey. And so often gets bandied around, you need to take Jacob Rees-Moggs' seat in Somerset in order to be able to have a majority, but thinking a bit more creatively about that might be the way forward in terms of winning power and being able to do something. I want to just draw 3 points together around this theme. First of all, even when that research first came out, that mountain to climb research, I was perhaps less pessimistic than some, because everything that we've studied over the last 5 to 10 years tells us that voters are now much more volatile. So getting the kinds of big changes that you need is much more likely. But I think that's also a warning for Labour and the left more generally, particularly at the moment, as the polling seems to be shifting quite rapidly, that it can shift back, and that you shouldn't be taking anything for granted really until votes are actually cast. Those polls can shift around really, really quickly. Voters are volatile, and that's something to bear in mind. I also wanted to touch on, I think Anneliese started to touch on it, what the impact of the crisis that we've all lived through, the COVID pandemic, is going to be on people's attitudes, preferences, and the thing I'm particularly interested in, their political and social values. And at the early part of the pandemic, I suppose if we go back to when some of these parties were taking place back last May, then there was some sort of hope, I think, of the left that, yes, this was a terrible thing that we were living through, but it would drive a desire to build back better, that kind of community spirit that Anneliese mentioned would be harnessed. And that was followed pretty rapidly by polling later in 2020 that suggested that actually people's attitudes and preferences hadn't shifted all that much, and that people weren't desperate for some kind of social change on the back of what had happened. Now, I think that's perhaps a little too pessimistic, and I think the role of the Labour Party and other elite people on the left, elite commentators on the left, making those connections and actually taking people's sense of what's happened and driving them to a position where they want to build back better is still possible. We've started to see some change. The most recently published British Social Attitudes Survey showed that we were getting some of the highest responses for things like ordinary people don't get their fair share of the nation's wealth, the highest ones that have been recorded since 1997-98. So there has been some change, but it's been gradual. I've also been involved recently in some focus groups in Yorkshire. And what was coming out of those focus groups, these were conducted a while ago, so we're talking September time, we're not talking kind of current crisis, was this sense that people were feeling that they were weathering three storms. They were weathering or had weathered the storm of COVID. They were weathering the storm of Brexit, and that was articulated in terms of the petrol and supply shortages at the time. And they were starting to talk about weathering a cost of living crisis. And what the sense to me that came out of those focus groups was that people wanted a government, politicians who would kind of put their arms around them a little bit, provide some security, but also provide some hope. So talk about how to look after people through those storms, help them weather those storms. And I mentioned there that those particular focus groups were conducted in Yorkshire. And of course, that was because somebody funded us to go and talk to people in the Red Wall. But I think my caution would be not to overplay place-based differences. Those storms will be affecting those in precarious positions on low incomes in Swindon as much as they are in Doncaster, and the same kinds of appeals and policies will be important for all those voters. So I think thinking about voters as individuals and what they need, rather than getting too hung up on particular types of places, is important. And my very final point is something to think about in terms of turnout, which sometimes gets missed in the discussion. It's usually assumed that high turnout is better for the left, but that's been changing in recent elections. And we're starting to see actually higher turnout not always being better for the left, and sometimes being better for the right. What we have is a situation where those in the most liberal left-wing groups already turn out now at a really, really high rate. There are not many voters left with that set of values that you can push to turn out further. And so I don't think anybody should be thinking, you know, in terms of turnout as a savior for the left. I think it's much more important to think about how to appeal to people, how to give people hope, and how to help them weather those three storms. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Loads of food for thought there. And finally, we're going to move on to contribution before we go to Q&A from Sarwar, MSP, again, who I'm sure needs no introduction, as the leader of the Scottish Labour Party. He's been in post since last year, and he's been a member of the Scottish Parliament for the Glasgow region since 2016. And of course, prior to that, he was a member of Parliament for Glasgow Central from 2010 to 2015. Thank you so much for joining us this afternoon, and please another round of applause for our final speaker.
Thank you, Chair. It's an absolute pleasure to be joining you, albeit remotely. And people often ask about the role of Scottish Labour. Well, Scottish Labour's got a few sleeper cells down there as well, one of them being Anneliese Dodds, who's helping lead the charge for us. Aberdeen's own Anneliese, and Anneliese has always been a great friend of the Scottish Labour Party, and it's great to see her having the chair role and leading that policy review to become a platform that's worthy of the next election, so we can elect Keir Starmer as our next Prime Minister. Look, I want to just cover a few things. The key question being, how can the left win? First of all, and this might sound obvious, but sadly in recent times in particular, it's often not seen the case, is we need to understand that winning matters. We are not a protest movement, although there is place for protest. We are not an opposition-only party, though there is a place for opposition. We only get to put into action all the important issues that you've been discussing at the conference today, all the things that take us onto the streets to campaign, all the things that lead us to go to long CLP meetings or policy forum meetings. We only get to enact our values and actually deliver and change the country if we win elections and form governments. So we've got to get that winning mentality back again. And that's the big culture we're trying to change in Scotland, is not just a culture of factionalism, but more importantly of changing a culture of defeatism and getting Labour back on the pitch again. The second thing is to recognise that leadership matters. People vote for people. Of course, we've got to win on ideas, but we've also got to win in terms of authenticity and in energy. And I think anyone that looks at the leader of the opposition and looks at the Prime Minister, they can see who is the serious one, who is the competent one, who is the strong one, and who will actually be on the side of people. And these are all strengths, I think, that we need to have going into the election campaign. The third thing, and I think this is a trap we risk falling into in the last couple of weeks, is we don't just win by winning the question of who is morally better or not. We can't just win an election based on who passes the morality test. We have to win an election based on who passes the test for who's best for our economy, who's best for the future of our country in terms of skills and employability, who's going to help deliver jobs for the future, who's best for our National Health Service, who's best for our education system. And these are all things that I think we need to build on and work on as we head towards the election. The fourth is we can't just wait for a party to lose an election. We've got to be worthy of winning an election. And that means not just going out and saying, although there is a place for that, help vote out Boris Johnson, help vote out the Tories, but actually positively why you should come and vote Labour and elect a Labour government and elect Keir Starmer as our Prime Minister. The fifth thing is, how do we respond to the politics of populism and division? We have two options in that. The Labour Party can either choose to do our own version of division, where we try and make 52% or 53% of the country angry with 47% and try and win an election. I don't think Labour ever wins in an us versus them election. We have to build an all of us. So in the face of that division, how do we have a message of unity that brings our country together? Second to that is we also live in a politics of anger. But we can't win anger by out-angering the far right or out-angering those that seek to divide our country in terms of nationalism. How do we win based on empathy, where we use the language of changing our country, pulling our country together, and actually bringing our people together? The SNP want to divide our country one way, the Tories want to divide our country another way. They both want to ultimately force you to choose a side. Only Labour and the left is on your side, regardless of how you might have voted in previous elections, or regardless how you might have voted in two big constitutional referendums. So how we root ourselves in that empathy and language of bringing people together. The third part of that is the politics of despair. Labour never wins an election, and the left never wins an election if it's an election of despair. We only ever win if we have a message of hope for our country about how we can build it and move forward and actually have a country that is worthy of growing old in, worthy of raising our children in, and worthy of investing our time and our energy in as well. So how do we have a message of hope is absolutely crucial to that. Further to that, nobody ever wins an election if you look like you're against your own country. And I think this is one part where we make mistakes. Sometimes it can sound like and look like we're talking down our country, whether that's in Scotland or whether we're talking about the UK. A party will only ever win if they look like and sound like and credibly show that they love their country, they want to change their country, and they're positive their country, and they believe the best days of their country lie ahead. That's not to say we ignore the challenges facing our country. Of course, we did address the challenges facing our country, but we root those failures and those challenges in what we want our country to be because of what we view it and how much we love it, rather than trying to talk our country down. And that brings me on to working class communities. I think one of the biggest challenges, I know this has been a debate in recent elections, is Labour losing ground in working class communities. In Scotland, the SNP picking up ground in working class communities, the Conservatives picking up ground in working class communities. I think the big challenge for the Labour Party is quite often, particularly in recent times, we have sounded like when we're talking to working class communities as if we're talking down to them, or we see them as some kind of dependent group we need to look out for, rather than talking to them in a way that recognises that ultimately they're aspirational, they're patriotic, they're aspirational, they love their local community, they're invested in the local community, they just want to make sure that they've got a fair chance going forward. So how we communicate and the language we use around working class communities is really important. We also have got to stop thinking about the past. For so long, the Labour Party and the left, we love doing it as part of our DNA. We love talking to ourselves, about ourselves. We love going over the past arguments. We have got to be rooted in the future, not in the past. So what are the big ideas that demonstrate we're embracing the future, particularly with women and particularly with young people? How do we talk about the digital revolution that's happening around the world and how our education system needs to fit with it? How do we talk about the digital revolution that means we can catch up in the NHS, not just save the NHS like we said in recent elections, but rebuild and renew our NHS for the future? How do we build new skills for the future so we have an economy that works for people for generations to come. That's those kind of big ideas that meet the aspirations of the social media generation. The generations are looking at their Instagram feed, looking at their Snapchat feed, looking at their Facebook feed, and have a different version of what they want their life to look like in the world of work, in the world of relationships, and in the global world that we face. And a big part of that is climate change. If you look at people's priorities now, we used to traditionally think jobs, NHS, schools. Actually, now it has to be four things. It's firstly, people think about their opportunities and their jobs. They think about the NHS. They then think about climate change and the planet. And then they think about schools and education. So how we factor all of those issues is really, really important. And then the final bit that I want to finish on, Chair, is talking about Scotland, as you would expect me to do. There is no path back for a UK Labour government that doesn't go through Scotland. So I've said this repeatedly before, and I'll say it again. The real red wall, the first red wall to fall with Scotland, unless we can win again in Scotland, we can't have a UK Labour government. That's partly on the UK Labour Party, but it's also partly on the Scottish Labour Party. So the first part of that is making people in Scotland believe Labour can win again. In recent times, people in Scotland haven't believed Labour can win again. I think we have a real opportunity, particularly in the last 2 months, with Partygate, with the chaos of Boris Johnson and the Tories, to demonstrate that Labour is on the pitch again, it can win again. And that means in Scotland saying, let's not just oppose the Tories, let's replace the Tories, and only Labour's able to do that. Alongside that, let's recognise that this is a Tory party that has attacked the very fabric of our society across the UK, has actually pulled the UK apart and pitted community against community. They cannot be seen as the champions for the United Kingdom. Labour has to be for the champions for United Kingdom, but not just, like I said, with the NHS, save the UK. It's about renewing, reforming and rebuilding the UK so we can build the future together as a Labour Party that is the real progressive alliance across the UK.
Thank you. Thank you for those inspiring thoughts. I don't know how to summarize that. There was such a lot in that last contribution, but again, these themes of the importance of our solidarity with each other, the ability to communicate beyond the echo chamber, and the importance of hope and casting a vision and ideas and not just despair and anger. I think that's so essential. We've heard that throughout the day from our speakers in different ways, really solid ideas that are casting a vision for the nation for people to get on board with as we look to form the next Labour government. Okay. Lovely people, here we are. It's time for Q&A. It's time for you guys. I think we're going to take questions from the floor in threes. Thank you so much, Holly. I see you with the mic. Yes, please, the delegate, the attendee here in the black top with the silver scarf first.
Hi. I just want to bring together something that Anneliese said and something that Anas said. I think hope is absolutely essential. But I don't think we need to have hope. I think we need to give hope. And Anneliese was very rightly talking about us being self-critical, self-aware, self-analytic. But we also desperately need to project self-confidence. We need to tell people that we know we can do better, not just in this shower, because that's a low bar, but that we can govern well, strongly, and really give the people what they want. And I think part of that, and this is not going to be a popular opinion, is looking at what people liked originally about Boris Johnson. And I think it was his self-confidence, that projection that he had, that I want to and can do this job. Now, he's fallen on his face and we can't do that. But I think in our race to not sound complacent, we too often don't sound confident. So what I would like to know is how the panel feel that we can project that confidence to the electorate.
Thank you so much. Great. There's a gentleman with glasses, grey jacket, white shirt.
Hi, my name is Rishi Patel. One of the areas I think we will continue to fall down is on culture wars and on these questions about, trans equality, LGBT equality, race relations, Black Lives Matter, where our historic positions and the positions of a lot of our members are perhaps at odds with what's going on perhaps in particular sections of this of society that we need to win over. So I'd be interested to hear what the panel has to think about that.
Lovely. And right, I'm going to come back around for another round, but in the blue dress next to the gentleman who just spoke. Sorry, behind you. I was trying to make it easy with the mic.
Thanks very much. Hi, I'm Cecilia, Chair of the International Network for the Young Fabians. I'm a Senior Policy Advisor and Political Commentator. And thank you firstly to the panel for such an informative discussion on such an important topic. So I was building a bit on what Annas mentioned about becoming the party for young people, for women. And something that we're working on at the moment is a pamphlet on the way that the pandemic has disproportionately impacted women. And I was just curious to hear your thoughts on how we build back and not go back to business as usual, and how we actually build up our policies and strategies for 2022 and further on in terms of becoming that voice for women and showing that solidarity and actually redressing some of the inequalities that have continued to expand in the face of the pandemic. Thank you.
Great. Okay, we'll come back for a further round of questions. And can I just check, are the online panelists all still with us? Yeah, no one's dropped off. Okay, wonderful, great. Thank you. So confidence, giving confidence to the electorate, culture wars, and how we make sure we don't go back to business as usual. I wonder, could we ask Paula for her thoughts? If you want to pick one question, Paula.
Can I run two of the questions together? I'll avoid.
Please.
Sorry, can you hear me? You can hear me, okay. I'll avoid the question about policy because that's not so much my thing. First of all, I wanted to pick up the point about what did people like about Boris Johnson and just turn it around a little bit. Some of the recent analysis that we published in the book about the 2019 general election actually highlights that Boris Johnson wasn't this massively popular figure. He was able to reach across into certain groups of voters, and amongst those voters he was popular, but more generally on average he was less popular than Theresa May was at the end of the 2017 campaign during the 2019 campaign. So there is something of a myth about him being a hugely popular and well-liked figure. He's a very divisive figure and was able to reach across to some of those groups, but that doesn't necessarily mean he was across the board popular. Actually, the thing I want to talk about most, though, is I'm obviously much more au fait with the things about the culture wars. And here, what I would say is, don't think about the culture wars as being two-sided, as being a binary. People's positions and values on these kinds of issues, the issues that lie on that dimension, are subtle, and not everybody is at one extreme or the other. And it's perfectly possible for the left more generally, and the Labour Party in particular, to find a way to talk to voters who are not as vehement about some of the identity politics issues as some Labour Party members are, but who are also not at the other extreme. And I think recognizing that you don't have to go from one end to the other, that there's a whole continuum there, helps you to find ways to talk to voters that don't feed into that kind of culture wars narrative. It isn't a simple binary. And I think thinking about it like that does a lot of damage.
Great, thank you for that helpful contribution on the theme of unity also. Can we go to Andreas?
Yes, maybe also to sum up a little bit the answers to the questions which had been pushed here. I think there is also Boris Johnson, of course, is giving a lot of reasons for a change. It is not about the Tories, it's not about him. I agree completely what Anna's was saying before. It must be about the Labour Party and its concept about the future. So the one side is you need the techniques, which is about communication. It's about real contact, people to people, politicians to people contact. And the other one is, of course, also about the future as such, especially in times where the presence is so difficult in times of COVID and all the other impacts. So it is about the futures, about the ideas. But it's not enough to have only ideas. You need also to show that there is the ability to change the future, to have an impact of the everyday life of everyday people. I think this is the most important thing which is important to understand. So I think the chances and the circumstances are quite good at the moment for Labour Party, and even more, it is important for the life of the people that there is coming a new government with new ideas and new change.
Thank you. And can we go to Anas?
Thanks again, Chair. They kind of all wrap into together. The first thing is you're absolutely right about giving hope and projecting confidence. One of the things I was really struck by in the last Scottish Parliament election was the number of people that said to me, it's the first time we've seen a Labour leader smile in an election for 15 years in Scotland. And people can see that and feel that, and can tell whether you're enjoying yourself and whether you're hopeful or positive, whether you're putting it on. So I think projecting confidence, projecting positivity, projecting hope, and demonstrating that we're serious about winning is really, really important. Secondly, and it feeds into the culture wars, but also in terms of the issue about women's inequality, is look, we can't, if you have an ideas-free election, you will get into a culture wars election. And let's be clear about this, the Tories will want a culture war election. The way we respond to that isn't by having our own version of a culture war. It's got to be about calling it out when it happens, having no hierarchy of prejudice or hate, being in the gold standard ourselves, and going back to those three principles about unity, empathy, and hope. And that feeds into, I think, the whole point about inequality for women. One of the big challenges that we face in inequality for women, you'll see it in terms of women coming forward to be candidates. Our political discourse is so angry, so divided, that it puts off people from women and minority backgrounds in particular. So let's change the way we do our politics, and let's also go in with an ambitious plan in the next election, which is about not just redressing the imbalance that was caused by the pandemic, but we're recognizing that women's inequality was happening before the pandemic, exacerbated by the pandemic, and we're not willing to go back to the way it was before COVID. Coming through COVID, we can build something better for across our country.
Thank you. And finally, Anneliese, perhaps also as leading on the policy review, you could particularly speak to that last question.
Yeah, absolutely. And I won't speak for too long because I can see that we're running out of time. But on that last question in particular, and indeed Rishi's question too, I strongly agree with what has been said. I think the right want us to portray issues around equality as always zero-sum game. That either one group benefits and another loses, or it's the other way around, that you can never, ever move forward together with policies that will benefit everyone. And I think we've got to be very, very clear that we have a totally different approach. I mean, we had an example of this actually just at the turn of the year, where we discovered absolutely appalling statistics about the extent of child poverty. It's building on the work that Wes had done on that before, who's still here, and showing that actually for some different groups of kids in the UK, child poverty has been going through the roof. So that was particularly the case for Black children, but actually for all children across the board, we've seen levels of child poverty going up right across the UK for all different ethnic backgrounds. So we were able to say this is a problem that's affecting everyone. It's particularly intense, of course, for Black children, but many of the measures that you put in place there would benefit everyone. So we've got to get beyond this zero-sum game. And then just finally, the point about self-confidence. Please, please, let's not forget, I agreed with everything that was said, but let's not forget, we are in government in the UK. We're in government in Wales, and my goodness, we're doing so much better a job on so many different indicators in Wales than the Westminster government is doing. We're in government when we've got metro mayors who are doing an incredible job. We're in government when we've got police and crime commissioners. And on that issue of violence against women and girls, we can see the difference as on so many other indicators. We aren't yet in government in Scotland, but we've got MSPs who are already getting legislation into the Scottish Parliament. And of course, Labour's been doing that as well from a position of opposition when we've won the argument many, many times. So let's be proud of what we have achieved. And I think when we are proud, and of course of our previous record as well, when we got those waiting lists down, we got child poverty down, we've revolutionised life for so many people in our country. When we're confident about that, then I think we can convey it to the public.
Thank you, excellent. Yes, definitely a round of applause for our contributors and that inspiring finish from Anneliese. Right, I know there's a couple of people down here that I couldn't bring in. The lady right by you, Holly, but she's on her phone now. So this gentleman up here with the colourful face mask.
Thank you. I'm glad I wore it now. I guess I'm going to ask that difficult question to Anas really, and to others on the panel, which is obviously, and I think this relates to the point around confidence and whether or not we think we can win in Scotland. We don't win and we don't form a UK government unless we start winning seats in Scotland again. I think, you know, there's a question of Indie Ref 2 and all of that. And I just wonder if we tiptoe around that specific issue, and if we don't have a firm position on what that's going to be and how we cooperate with the SNP and any future government, whether it be coalition or not. I just think that it'd be better just to really have that open and detailed discussion and figure out what position is going to be, because I think people of Scotland at the moment think and see the Conservatives winning. And when it is that question of people who believe in the union, or if you believe in an independent Scotland, then they'll probably vote Conservative because they think the Conservatives are more pro-union than we are. So I think it'd be just really interesting if we can firm our position in and around that and give confidence to people in Scotland that voting for Labour is, you know, something in terms of the union, etc. And I think just that one last reflection, if you'll indulge me, is just around this point around that we are winning in certain locations as well, and we are doing good things. And I think we could do a much better job of actually shouting out about the good progressive policies that we are putting in place as well. Thank you.
Great. I'm not going to indulge you too long because of the time. And where are we near with the microphone? You've been very patient in the blue jumper. And then the next question, please, from the lady in the grey hoodie, red mask, grey puffer, sorry.
Thank you. My name is Kieran. I am from a very rural town in the back end of Durham Northwest, which sadly flipped blue in 2019. And the general vibe within my small community was that the Labour policies were very metropolitan. They were conjured up down south in the back of rooms, out of touch of those places. When in retrospect they weren't, but people were buying into the idea of what the Tories were saying, that it was all done by metropolitan elites and so on. And I just wondered, maybe Anneliese, this one's for you, and how we can show people in those rural communities that Labour policy is made by everyone across all regions. I was reading a point about maybe a super cabinet of Andy Burnham, Mark Drakeford, Scottish leaders and so on. And I'd just like to hear your ideas on that.
Thank you, and some Tracy Braben women, etc. Thanks. Otherwise, great leaders. Lovely. Final question. Thank you.
I'm so I stand up. How does Labour myth bust? There's all these myths about Labour that have now become facts, like during the last Labour government. There's this myth that's half become fact. The Tony Blair let in all the immigrants, or that Labour crashed the economy. How do we myth bust before they become facts?
Great. Excellent. Okay, so I'm going to direct the questions because I'm conscious of the time in this last bit. Anneliese, can we come to you first with that brilliant question about rural people that live in rural communities in our policy-making process?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I have to say this comes very naturally to me because I'm really proud of that Labour representation and movement that we have up and down across the country, and I've seen it in action just about everywhere. I've even seen it in a tiny little island off the coast of Skye, where I was this summer in part of a kind of grand tour around visiting Labour councillors and Labour members. And of course, as we've just been talking about, we've got that representation right across the country, and we've taken that on board in Stronger Together. So actually, you've got those different voices represented, the Metro mayors and the other teams, Scottish and Welsh teams, local government as well. One of the reports that came out of Stronger Together actually showcased those different examples of Labour delivery, and from Labour authorities also up and down the country. Really great examples where, despite the Tories often standing in the way of us improving lives for our communities, you can see how Labour's already making that change. But I think also we've got to show that we care about those issues that people in rural areas care about too. And obviously the rural review that Luke was working on previously and that Jim has now taken on board, that is doing exactly that. You know, when we talk about housing policy that will be available for people on normal incomes, that people would be able to get that step on the ladder and just be able to rent as well in the place where their parents grew up, that's going to matter in spades if you live in so many different rural parts of our country. When we talk about accessibility of services, you know, people's ability to train, to upskill, as Cllr has talked about so often. Again, that's so important in many rural communities where it's really, really hard to get access to those opportunities that in many urban areas people would take for granted. So it's something that I'm really passionate about and that we're hardwiring in to our policy development process. And if you'll forgive me, just one word about Scotland really, really quickly, because I think we've got a tremendous opportunity now with Anas leading the Scottish Labour Party, because I think his positivity cuts just like a knife through butter in Scotland, where people are so sick of what I call the Barney between the Nats in Holyrood and the Tories in London. They're always at it. It's always someone else's fault. And then Anas comes along and says, no, we can sort this out by doing X, Y, Z. And people listen to him. We've not been in that position for quite a long time. So all power to his elbow.
Yeah, brilliant. Thank you so much. So back online, whizzing through. Unsurprisingly, Anas, can we come to you on that question about Indie Ref 2 and being, Labour is a strong unionist party?
Thank you. I'll make sure I send the chocolates to Anneliese for the very kind comments just a moment ago. Look, I think it's a really important question about Scotland, and one I think we need to address head on. First thing is, and I mentioned this in the opening, is the psychological barrier about people in Scotland believing UK Labour can win again. I don't think people have believed in the last 2 or 3 general elections that UK Labour could win. And that's why when they were going out to vote, they were voting on based on who they thought was best at opposing the Tories rather than who could replace the Tories. So that psychological barrier, really, really important. The second part is to recognise that the Tories are actually the biggest threat to the United Kingdom. And I don't say that lightly. If you think about Brexit chaos, if you think about Theresa May chaos, if you think about the Boris chaos, they are the best cover for the SNP. Because every single time there's a failure in Scotland, Nicola Sturgeon just needs to stand up and say, and point down at Boris Johnson and say, things might be bad here, but at least we're not as bad as that lot over there. So they are not the great defenders of the United Kingdom. They are the biggest threat to the United Kingdom. And that might be one reason why the Scottish Conservatives are so keen to get rid of Boris Johnson. The third thing I'd say about this is it suits the SNP and the Tories to squeeze Labour in the middle and make it all about constitutional politics. If you remember that Conservative Party campaign where they had Ed Miliband in Nicola Sturgeon's pocket, that wasn't about gaining votes in Scotland. That was about gaining votes in England, because they were playing up Scottish nationalism in order to say that only they could stop Scotland having more influence or control, and they could push for more votes for Labour. So that's a deliberate strategy to try and get people to pull votes away from the Labour Party in England, as well as pushing votes away from the Labour Party in Scotland. And that's why we've got to have a robust line. We are an unashamed pro-UK party. We believe in the strength of the United Kingdom. We believe in redistribution of wealth and power. It's who we are as a political party. We will stand on an unashamed pro-UK platform. But we can still say to people who supported independence in that referendum is you have a chance to vote for change across the UK, a reformed, renewed UK, by voting for a Labour Party that's going to stop the pushing of people into the hands of the nationalists along the way. And the final point I'd make is we have got to be really, really clear. No ifs, no buts, no deals with the SNP. If we win a majority Labour government, that's our one aspiration. If we don't win a majority but the largest party, we can dare other parties. You can either have a Labour government or a Tory government. We dare the SNP to support a Tory government and see how Scotland reacts to them.
Yeah, excellent. Hear, hear. Brilliant. So we're going to come to Paula next and ask her about myth busting in less than 1 minute, please, Paula, and then we'll wrap up with Andreas. He'll have free choice of what he wants to answer. Okay, so on myth busting, myths that are already in the public domain, it is too late to bust them, and you end up looking A, you end up looking apologetic, and B, you end up reinforcing them by trying to bust them all the time. The important thing is to show and do something different so that the electorate change their minds or forget about those myths to a certain extent. I don't think trying to address myths of the past is a useful thing to be doing right now. Is that brief enough? Amazing. Thank you so much. Final round of applause for Paula. And last but by no means least, Andreas. Please pick one question and answer it.
Yeah, thank you. Maybe also to try not to overuse the time constraint. Simply it's about the middle class, whether it lives in the cities, in the mega cities, or on the countryside. It is about the option for a better life with concrete proposals. I think today there came a lot of education, climate, housing, other ones. But I want to put also in the center of what we discussed today one issue which was also said before, and I think is extremely important. It is about being a political movement and political persons who are positive in the approach, and showing that they like the life, but also they have the ability to change and to do what is necessary for the society. The positive people will also get positive energy from the voters. Therefore, I think it was also a very positive conference today.
Wonderful, thank you. Thank you so much, Andreas. Thank you, Anna. Thank you, Paula. Thank you, Anneliese. Thank you all for being with us. I'm going to hand over to Andy to close in a moment, and just want to go back to those words that Anya shared before we started the session: integrity, imagination, inclusiveness. And isn't that the Fabians, isn't that Keir Starmer's Labour Party in contrast to what we've got at the moment? And it's profoundly exciting to be starting this year with you all here. We don't know what's going to happen in the local elections, but it's exciting because our country needs us. And we must never lose sight of that's what this is about, isn't it? Is serving our country well, and a nation that is desperate for governance and a government that is better than this. So thank you for giving your Saturday. I'm going to hand over. Thank you to all the Fabian staff, and thank you to Andy, because you often don't get thanked as the General Secretary. So let's say thank you to Andy before I hand over.
And in return, thank you to Sara and all the brilliant work that the Fabian Women's Network do. So that's it, that's the end of the day. Thank you so much to all of our delegates in the room, all of our online delegates, and to our fantastic speakers in the room and online today, who have made this such a rich, fulfilling, optimistic day. And doesn't that feel like a break? So I feel like a change. I want to do a few thank yous myself, but before I do that, just to ask anyone who by any chance is in this room or online who is not a Fabian member, why not? And get on the website and join right now. And if you are a Fabian member, please do consider giving more to the society by clicking the donate button on our website. But the thank yous I want to really make are to the staff and volunteers who have made today possible. The staff of this wonderful venue and the technical staff who have made the AV all work, and particularly to my own team, who are just brilliant. They work so hard to make these events happen. Two people I want to single out amongst a team who are all amazing. One is the person who made the technical stuff happen and get our speakers on those screens, which was no mean feat, and that's John Rafferty. And above all, the organizer, the impresario of this event, Katie Curtis. Enjoy your trip home if you're in the room, and you can come and join us for a drink afterwards. Sorry, that isn't available to online delegates. Enjoy your trip home from your front room or your computer screen, or in Andreas's case, his mobile phone. And we'll see you at another Fabian conference very soon. Thank you, everyone.